much. I'm always a little bit intimidated following Chester up on the stage here because he owns this place and he owns the enthusiasm that we've all had over the last couple of days. As I've been thinking sort of in the background during the Verizon studio where I was fortunate to participate about what we're up to in the studios, it's occurred to me that impact is sort of that interesting relationship between an individual often, starts sometimes with an individual, and an idea. And an idea that they feel so strongly about, they couldn't possibly not just do it. We're going to explore a bit in this conversation that we're going to have right now. I've been told it's going to be a little bit like the View. I don't know if anybody's ever seen The View here, and I'm going to be a little bit like Whoopi Goldberg, so we're going to see how that goes, so hold on for the ride. We're going to explore that transition from having the idea to actually stepping off the curb. How many of you in the audience have had an idea that you just felt incredibly powerful about, that you felt would have an amazing impact, but you'd really have to change your life in order to be able to do it? Show of hands. Okay, so there's very many of us. How many of us have actually stepped off the curb and done it? I got to keep my hand sort of like in the middle. There we go. Okay, so there's fewer. So we're hoping that we can learn from our friends that we're going to bring up right now about some of what gets us going and allows us to step off the curb. I'd like to be joined up on stage right now on the sofas here by Rhea Dall. Rhea. Rhea is the director of the Young Artists Society and the co-founder of Praxis. Learn a bit more about that in a minute. Daniel Siraj, CEO of OBOS, welcome. Ezinne, I'm resisting making the joke that you need to do this entry fast. So Norway's fastest woman, Ezinne Okparaebo, welcome. And Mr. Vidar Helgesen, the former Climate and Energy Minister of Norway. Welcome. And so then Whoopi sits on the little stool here in the middle. All right. So, and I'd love to begin with you if that's okay.
That's okay.
I think it's fascinating that the story of impact that we're going to look at with yourself basically starts with the crime of turning 27.
Sort of.
Sort of. Can you explain that a bit to us?
Yes, I can. I've been doing athletics since I was 12 years old. And I've been fortunate to have experienced a lot and have achieved a lot. And it was right before the Olympics in 2016 in Rio. And I was considered, there was a lot of expectation on me to perform, and I failed to achieve my full potential in Rio. And just within a short of time, I was the girl that no one believed in anymore. I was 27, and I was told that I was too old for athletics, for the federation, and that my time was basically over in athletics. And during that time, I used all my spare time, and I was a little bit disappointed, but I didn't want to give up. So I used it to build Ezinne Athletics, which is an organization for girls, to empower girls through sport, and especially for girls with minority backgrounds, such as me. So I used that to really get it started as a motivation.
Thank you. So, thank you. So inspiring minority girls through sport, and the objective of this discussion now is to talk about what it takes to step off and actually do the idea. But I'm curious, based on what you shared there, once you got started and once you started to interact with these girls and see what they were capable of, what came back to you?
I just see the girls coming out of their shells, and they ask me all the time, can we have more training? We need to have more training. And I also see them being more social and connecting with one another being positive human being, and we also encourage them to do something positive for the community. So hopefully we are helping to build new generation who are socially aware of the things going on around them. Not just in sport. Yes, I would like to have more talents, discover talents, but I also think it's the inclusion in the society and use sports to build self-esteem, and also to believe in yourself that you can do anything regardless. And I believe that with sport, you can master, and when you master different tasks in sport, you can use it also outside sport in every area of your life.
And then you started running again.
Yes, I did. I took a little break after that because I had to think to myself, because when you hear all the time that you're not good enough, when you hear that you're done and no one believed in you from a short period of time, everyone believed in you and were like, whoa, you're gonna do great. And in life, sometimes things does not happen according to how we wish. Sometimes in life just happens. And I also think it's very important to use that and not to, because you will have doubts, but it's just to always believe in yourself. And if you lose that faith in yourself, then it's over. You can never lose it, even though other people does not believe in you. So I use that, and last year I had the best performance I've had in 2 years, and I'm going for Tokyo Olympics.
Congratulations, and what a lesson for those girls. Absolutely
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So Daniel, you're leading OBOS, and I haven't come across too many property developers like yours that are member-owned and are focused on really building housing that that most people, folk flest in Norwegian, can buy and own themselves. And I think that's so interesting. And I'm curious, what was it earlier in your life that inspired you to end up on this particular path?
The choices you make in life is a combination of the people you meet and the choices you make. I would never have been working in OBOS if I hadn't met the boss of OBOS in Shanghai 15 years ago, and he had heard something nice about me, and my boss told him that this is a good guy, you should employ him. And then some years later, I was out of work, and I called him and I said, you remember what you told me in Shanghai some years ago? Do you still want me to work for you? And he said, okay, yes, can you come to my office? And then at some stages, he put something in front of me, and he said, do you want to pursue the path? I'm an educated lawyer, and he told me, do you want to be a good lawyer, or do you want to be a businessman? And at that point, I could have been a great lawyer, but I chose to go the business path, and you had to actually jump on board. I had no qualifications as a businessman, but as I tell my employees now, if somebody believes in you, you actually have to step out, and you have to use the resources around you to build a career. And that was how I built my career and ended up as the CEO of OBOS. And then through this, I've been able to make a change and make an impact on younger people and people around me.
One of the things that really struck me when you were sharing your story earlier was that, very often when a CEO takes over a position, there's 100 days or there's some sort of period where you have to show that you were a good choice and you have to make an impact. And sometimes it can even seem like a little bit of an ego-based journey. But you described taking a different tactic.
The former CEO of OBOS, he built up this fantastic company through 33 years. So when I was given the mission to take over as the CEO, I decided I had to treat the past with respect. I wanted to do some changes, but I didn't want a revolution, because there's no need for a revolution. We've all been building up, and we have to manage what we have been giving. I'm just a manager temporarily on this journey. I have to give my twist. So I decided, instead of making a revolution, I took my employees on on a mission to try to change. I decided that we needed alignment. We needed alignment with our employees. We were a company that had grown a lot. We needed alignment with our customers. What do they want? And we needed alignment with society. And this was actually a quite nice way to not making a revolution, but making a silent change. And then it ended up with kind of a revolution, but without having to take a negative view on the past. And I think has been a quite effective way of making a positive change instead of something else.
Thank you. Thank you. So Vidar, I wonder if you maybe also dream of water, or at least of plastic, right? That was cheap, wasn't it?
I live in water.
You live in water, exactly. So I thought it was interesting in discussing with you how, as the former Minister of Climate and Energy, long career in politics, this, I guess it isn't really nascent, but what we're seeing happening around plastic in the oceans is very definitely now. You decided to pull that thing down and try to do something transnationally and quickly, which are two words that don't necessarily often come together. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to act on that right at this moment?
Well, we all know that plastic is a huge challenge. It's a useful product, but it's also a huge environmental challenge. Probably the fastest growing environmental problem in the world. And it's created a lot of positive action and activity. Beach cleaning, circular economy models, business is coming along. Beach cleaning is a new popular movement around the world, so that's great. But you do need ultimately to have governments get their act together in terms of waste management systems, in terms of supporting circular economic models, in terms of recycling schemes, deposit schemes, etc. And we were last year preparing for the UN Environment Assembly, which takes place every second year. And Norway had tabled a resolution, which is how these things work, 195 countries that should agree on something. And then in this process comes realization that we need something for the world to rally around here. And the WWF, the environmental NGO, ran this campaign saying the world needs a zero vision. That's what it needs to start with. And it struck me that's it's evident, but there's a lot of evident stuff that doesn't happen in international organizations and international negotiations. But it struck me we should try to embed that as the vision and as the goal in that resolution. So even if we had tabled a resolution, I decided to announce that we would go for a call for a zero vision. We changed our draft resolution. That in itself is fairly complicated in these things. And this happened in October last year that we did this. And through, first of all, the WWF campaign that was ongoing. Secondly, our extremely good negotiators from our government and building allies with other countries. Between mid-October and mid-December, we were actually able to get that passed. So 195 countries agreed to that vision. That doesn't mean that plastic is disappearing, but it does mean that in a remarkably short period of time, we were able to get that as the objective, and that's now unleashed proper negotiations among governments on how to make that happen.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm curious, was there any point in that, I mean, 2 months is a pretty compressed period, obviously, for that sort of activity, but was there any point during that 2 months where you just sat down with your team and said, you know, it just doesn't look like this is going to go?
Well, I actually, when I called for it, I didn't think it was going to go.
Okay.
I thought it was not realistic. What happened was you had a civil society engagement, you had governments seeing that there was a pressure for things to happen. Obviously also showing action on plastic is increasingly popular for politicians around the world. But you do have some countries that are always skeptical when it comes to new international agreements.
Right.
I'm not going to mention names here, but there are a few. And they were recalcitrant. They didn't want this. But in the end, they saw that blocking this entirely would not be favorable to their image. So they too accepted this. So it was a remarkable process of a groundswell of civil society and political opinion coming together.
Thank you. Thank you. So Rhea, the arts. The arts.
The arts.
The art of impact.
The impact of art.
Exactly, the impact of art. I was trying to make a bad joke about the name of this panel and what you're going to tell us about, but that clearly didn't work. But what I was thinking about was you were provoked by what you interpreted to be the sort of commercialization or industrialization, the almost entertainment industrialization of art, where you saw a lot of museums being sort of boiled down to how many visitors are coming through and how much money is going to the cafeterias and all this other stuff, right?
Sure.
And then you just said no. What happened? Describe that process to us.
So I've worked in different contemporary art institutions, and you can probably relate to this, I guess. When you work in an arts institution, you often work with 5 exhibitions coming up, 3 that you're taking down, the 5-year plan, the fundraising, and all of this, meaning that you're running really, really fast. And the core of your institution, which is to work sustainably and in depth with the artist on creating an exceptional product, an exceptional output, is what gets the least attention. And having done that for a few years, I was exhausted. And I think that relates a little to Ezinne, your pitch. Exhausted, and I actually find that really boring, because me being exhausted means nothing. What is interesting is, of course, that is systemic across the art world. So when I sit here as a singular person, I feel I represent loads of art professionals, and not the least the artists, who are not being supported by the institutions that support them, and should support them in creating new statements, the complexity we're after when we think of real creativity. So I stopped for a second, and I was lucky enough to find some funds to do things differently from various organizations, but one being actually a research stipend from the Danish government. And that leads me back to Scandinavia, and to thinking about what I think is one of the incredible values when you look at this region, which is that we have, and we work for, and the institution I work for now, the Young Artists Society in Norway, continuously talk to politicians about putting resources towards the base of that ecosystem, which it is contemporary art, the place where the real new is happening. And you might think for yourself, that is less important. I don't understand contemporary art. We're sitting in the square, and some of you might have seen the square, that wonderfully, and I really enjoyed it, ridicules contemporary art as being, ununderstandable, all of this. But I have to say, there is part of the non-understandable contemporary art that is so important, because that's the abstract art that 60 years later trickles into all of your homes. That when it happens, you don't understand it, but you need it. And governments in this part of the world invest, and should invest more, let's not forget, but invest in that kind of long-term growth when we look at the arts. And so looking at all of you, that's what corporate organizations, structures should do as well, I think.
I love that. Didn't understand it yet, but it was still important. Right?
That's great. But just to say something very quick, so when I started on the back of that experience of being exhausted was then an institution in Berlin where I worked with 2 artists for a very long time, half-year periods, and then I took on the directorship of the Young Artists Society where I work now, and I take on some of the same ideas. And it's both an institution where we show contemporary art as a platform, so please come by. It's not very far from here, 10 minutes walk. And it's also an organization where we talk to politicians about the rights and position of young artists in society and how important they are.
When does it open?
So it's open every day at nautical dusk, and that's because...
So pay attention to when nautical dusk is.
Well, today I think it's at 16:15.
Okay.
So please come by. There's a reason for that, of course.
I'm sure there is.
But that's about environmental concerns.
Exactly.
So we can talk about that.
Okay, let's come back to that. I think, you know, when I was observing some of the groups in the studio, it occurred to me that, you know, you might be naive enough to think that the process that leads you to launch and step off and do that new idea is a positive and inspirational one. But you were exhausted, right? Yeah. You were out of a job. Nobody believed in you, and you thought it was impossible. And you still did it. So that's I think, pretty interesting. So I think we owe you a round of applause for that. So, despite the fact that it appears a bit daunting, it's worth doing. I asked each of you to think about whether or not you wanted to ask somebody else that was up here a question so that I don't over-whoopee and just ask all the questions. Did anybody come up with anything?
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
What I've always admired about, I'm a lot into football, but you're in a sport where you're on your own and with your trainer. How do you motivate yourself for doing the things you do every day, training? I work with a team, so I got a lot of people around me inspiring me and giving me ideas, but you're on your own. How do you motivate yourself and get the inspiration you need in your everyday life? Or in your training, not in everyday life, but in your training?
It's a good question, because sometimes you don't always have the motivation. Sometimes you just don't want to train. But what works for me is to have a goal. Each year, I write down my goals. And when I feel the motivation is lacking, I look back at my goals and I think to myself, if I don't work hard today, I know my competitors are. So I have to work hard, not even harder than them, just to compete with them. And also because I might not always like it, but deep inside I have a passion, I love it, to always improve myself, not just in athletics, but also me as a person. And doing athletics helps me to evolve as a person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. But with your competitors, are they only competitors, or is there also a collegiality that inspires you?
It is. I'm just going to say not to brag, but I can brag a little bit. But I've been the best in Norway for more than a decade. And it's really hard to always motivate myself and to have people to push me. Therefore, I've been training. I've trained in USA, in England, and now in Germany. So we help each other also outside the borders. So I don't see them always as competitors, but also that we can make each other better. Because when you have people that are working towards the same goal and brilliant people that can join force, I think it will create something really good.
When you came back to your girls after you set that time, best time in 2 years, do you have any recollection of what you said to them?
I mean, they asked me some questions when they saw on the news that I was not supported. So they told me, are you going to retire? What are you going to do? So it was a hard question for me because I always tell them not to give up, always, no matter what, keep going. So I wanted to be an example. I couldn't just give up like that. So to come back and still training is also my way of motivating them to keep going on in life, regardless. So.
Thank you. Daniel, there was something that you shared about the motivation to do the sort of work that you do and to choose different paths actually in your life comes from quite a long way back.
Yeah, I grew up in my childhood. My parents were missionaries in Pakistan, and I grew up with development work. That was my background from when I was a kid, from when I was 5 to 7. And so I've always had this drive of changing the world in some aspect. And I'm seeing how unselfish work, and I share the story with me walking around with an old picture, going for where other kids would walk their dog, I would walk my bull, because we were in a development project, so we were giving poor people cattle to grow their own business. So I was walking the bull. So I've always had this drive to change the world. And I think that's one of the most important things. Now I'm in a position to actually change the world, because there's immense power in huge corporations. We have smart people, we have capital, we have access to decision making that is far swifter than in politics. So people ask me, are you going back to politics because they have a background there? I say no, because the decision making in a huge corporation can be quite swift, and I'm lucky enough to have a board that allows me to make this kind of decision. So when we decided that 10% of our surplus after tax is going to be given back as a dividend to society, I had a board applauding. So we have invested hundreds of millions of kronas every year now for the last 3 years, giving back to society. And for the next 10 years, it will be billions, because of being able to take swift decision, thinking this is our aim, and then doing something about it. And I would have failed if I hadn't taken my drive and done something about it. It would have been a personal failure and a failure to society.
Thank you. We've got a question from the next generation emerging there, but did you have a...
Yeah, I had, but so obviously one of the challenges in Norway right now is that gentrification happens so fast, and that for the young artists I work with means that you know, low-income groups, which also includes young artists, that at this point earns around, I think, 9,000 euros a month from their art. So that's way too little. And then, of course, they supplement with other things, but that you can simply, you can survey this and you can see how their breathing spaces in town, but both living and exhibiting situations are becoming more and more impossible. Do you, so with OBOS being, you know, aiming at, I guess, a more sustainable, more complex situation, is this anything, or are you addressing such?
It's actually one of the, it's a good question, and we have been working with this for a long time, because I feel that, like, personally, I think we're failing if we don't pick up on bridging the divides in our society, and lower income groups are falling more and more behind in this housing market, which is a free market. The free market is good in many aspects, but in some ways it's not. So this spring we developed a model for selling homes cheaply to lower income groups without giving subsidies, and so we put it into action. It was so quick thinking. We used 2 weeks of developing the idea. In April and in June, we implemented it and sold the first 100 apartments. That was 20% below market rate. 2 income groups that wouldn't have had the opportunities. And now we're working on how to expand this model. And our ambition is, for sometime in the future, to make this a steady part of our business, saying a percentage of everything we produce, everything, is going to be sustainable housing in this model.
That's very interesting. One of the projects we work on right now, beyond exhibiting, is actually artists' housing, and that together with the Oslo city. So this is something we have to do together, because exactly. OBOS can't do it alone. If it's only an OBOS model, it will be a couple of hundred homes a year. It has to be a common effort through a lot of developers, through organizations like yourselves, and the municipality do it as a common effort to solve this problem.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see that we've got just a hair over a minute left, and I'd like to ask you the final question, Vidar. If you had an opportunity, and having the benefit of all the experience that you have now, and knowing that we've got a lot of people in the audience here who are excited about some concepts that they've worked up in the last day and a half or so, and might like to try them, what advice would you give the people that are about to do something that they believe right now is probably not possible, but is still important?
I think I would give the same piece of advice that I got from my mentor a number of years ago. I turned 50 last week. So this is a hard question. Now, she's been a pioneer in many domains. Right now, she's Norway's oldest ever serving member of parliament at the age of 86. And she told me, Vidar, remember this. Never, ever make up your mind as to what you want to be when you grow up. And I think that's a good piece of advice also for setbacks, because there's always the opportunity to change course and do new things.
I think there's many examples of that on this panel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks so much for sharing with us.